All right, now that conversation over there is what brings us into our next part of this show, which is just having a conversation about some of the stories that have made headlines. First of all, my guests are here. That is Ken Gishinga, our resident analyst, and also an economist from Mentoria. Ken, karibu.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and Ken today is joined by Dr. Tobias Olwenyi, who is also an economist and a lecturer at JKUAT. Dr. welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so gentlemen, I know it's a bit cold, but let's warm up. We'll have a warm conversation this afternoon. So first of all, when you look at those numbers from DTB, they're talking about a growth of 5 to 5.5%. Ken, do you think we're going to get to those numbers?
Well, the economy is actually quite tight right now, not least because of the fiscal tightening and the monetary tightening. Interest rates on bank loans are about to hit 20%. And the taxes from the Finance Act are actually going to affect consumption. So it's hard to see those numbers being achieved in the current setup. I would expect it to be slightly below 5% in my estimation.
Ken, actually, I know you talked about to hit 20%, but I know in the case of some banks, we're already at those 20%. So, Dr. as you weigh into this conversation, there is the question of we have had a lot of disruptions in terms of what has been happening, particularly over the last month, where we have 2-3 days of zero economic activities, particularly within major towns. Do you still see those numbers being attainable this year?
I think that's being too optimistic. The numbers are too high. Going by the way we are recovering in our economy, especially from the demonstrations that made us not do many things. Apart from that, most organizations or companies will be affected by the current Finance Act. And I think also the macroeconomic within the world, like say the Ukraine, Russia, is still having effects. So I think that is being too optimistic in terms of projection.
All right, so being too optimistic, well, I think the sentiment that I'm getting from both of you is that these numbers are a bit too optimistic, to quote Daktari. But then, Ken, there's the question of, again, when you look at the global economy, we're projecting a slowdown of about 3%.
Right.
And definitely that is going to have an impact on Kenya. So the question is, how big or what are the likely margins that is going, the effect of that to the Kenyan economy?
It will be significant, Jimmy. If you look at the American economy, as we speak, Fitch has already downgraded them. Go to Europe again, you're finding the Bank of England has raised interest rates, and the economy is slowing down. And in China has, the manufacturing sector has been slowing down. The property slump has affected the economy. So it's hard to see where growth prospects will be. And those are the major export destinations of Kenyan produce. So one would be able to say that it's unlikely that we'll be able to hit aggressive growth targets when our export partners are struggling, and also domestically when the consumption trends are a bit soft.
Daktari, those numbers are almost similar to the numbers from the National Treasury in terms of projection. And of course, the argument from that side has been that the agriculture sector is already recovering. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that in quite a bit. But then from other macroeconomic perspectives, apart from just agriculture and the service sector, there are sectors that are still struggling. When you look at the manufacturing sector, it's still struggling. So how then do we say that because I'm sure if you ask economists from the National Treasury, they will say these are actually the biggest contributors to our, that is our inflation numbers. So food inflation, a big conversation. Now we're seeing it down to 7.3. So going forward, and just judging by the last few months that we have seen, where do you see inflation standing, and generally in terms of that growth?
I think the inflation we've seen going down from about 9 to 7.3%, I think it's not likely to take a downward trend because of what you have just mentioned, the food production. The droughts will actually affect us, and that will actually make the cost of food stuff to go up. And again, also we will not ignore the effect of the taxes, the new taxes that are coming in with the Finance Act. The economy is likely to still, we are not likely to still see inflation rising. So to me, I would not really be comfortable that we'll now be at 7.3%. I think we are going to go up again.
All right. So, Ken, let's talk about this agriculture sector. Again, Kenya is largely a rain-fed agricultural sector. Now, we have been trying to invest a lot of money towards fertilizers and fertilizer subsidy. In the long run, before we even talk about the most recent subsidy of the 1,000 shillings, just from the long run, what is the net effect of that in terms of food production? Do you see any progressive or any huge success in terms of our agricultural output?
Well, agriculture is the bedrock of this economy. It contributes almost 25% of our GDP. So any attempt to boost production, whether it's from fertilizer subsidies, will be able to make production much better. Now that said, the fertilizer subsidy has to work with the planting cycle. Right now we are moving towards the harvesting cycle. So I think one important thing is the CECs in the counties of agriculture need to coordinate with the National Ministry of Agriculture. That said, agriculture is the sector that has so many linkages towards value addition. So if this move is able to make sure that every farmer has access to fertilizer, definitely I think it will be a big plus. It will be able to boost production in the food basket areas. And as you will see, as we've already seen in the inflation numbers, the food component has actually been coming down due to better rains, access to fertilizer. But also the agriculture value chain is also much more broader than fertilizer. So if they can also look at those other sectors, I think we can have a very robust outlook for that particular subsector. All
right. So, Daktari, earlier when we were beginning the year, fertilizers were going for about 6,000. They went, the government, of course, put in measures to slash it by half. We came down to 3,500. And now, just this week, we have seen the president also announcing that this is going to go down further by an extra 1,000 shillings. But again, the argument from farmers is we're getting this fertilizer a bit too late in the day, in the sense that we are, like Kenan said, it is almost harvest season. So what I want to know from you is fertilizer the main ingredient in just bringing down the cost of food, or are there things that maybe we might be missing as we focus more on fertilizers?
I think fertilizer is a good intervention, but there are so many more that we can actually focus on. But then, just like we are saying, the planting cycle is not coinciding with the time the fertilizer prices are being reduced. In my view, you see, the rain-fed agriculture is not really taking us anywhere far. We need to think in terms of, we need to think outside the box so that we don't depend on the rain-fed agriculture because of the changes, the climate change. So our agriculture should actually take the side where we recognize the climate changes that are occurring, and we should actually go towards technology. Let's move towards technology in our agriculture, and also not only fertilizer, but also look at the credit side, like say, how do we offer credit to the farmers, to the people that are involved in the chain of agriculture.
Okay, so let's just have a look at this story before we go into that conversation.